Cybersecurity continues to be a front burner issue for directors. This quarter, we've invited two experts to delve into the area of cybersecurity, to talk about a new handbook being produced by the NACD. And what are the important concepts and what are the important questions that each of us should be asking as we oversee our responsibilities relative to cybersecurity. So with that, let's get right to the highlights.
For too long, many of us have thought about cybersecurity as an IT issue, and it's not an IT issue. It is an enterprise-wide risk management issue. The number one vulnerability is people. A lot of us think of these attacks as hacker attacks from the outside, and certainly there are a number of those. But Carnegie Mellon University tells us half of all the successful breaches are inside jobs. So it has nothing to do with the technology. It has to do with the people who are managing the technology. And a lot of the problem has to do with this notion that it's not my responsibility, that the security of the data is the IT department's responsibility. And so people do not take responsibility for securing their own data, and they need to be involved in it. And in the book, what we advocate is that organizations develop an enterprise-wide risk management team that includes IT, but also includes the chief financial officer, the human resources department, the audit group, et cetera. And all of these elements of the organization need to be working together, much like the cyber systems now work together. One of the first things that we have to realize is that our systems are interconnected. So even if you are doing an excellent job with respect to cybersecurity, as many organizations already are doing, that's probably going to be insufficient because a lot of the points of vulnerability are the entities that you are interrelated with. Some of the highest profile attacks, such as the Target attack, wasn't really on Target. It was on the air conditioner vendor to Target. The air conditioner vendor didn't have the adequate incentives to protect the data because it wasn't their data. Target needed to do that. So we need to understand that we are not just a company, we are part of a broad ecosystem of companies, and we need to be thinking about cybersecurity in this broader context. Cybersecurity is not an end product, but rather part of everything that we are doing. So when boards are considering new product launches, mergers, acquisitions, they need to be involving themselves in the cybersecurity aspects of those core business decisions, rather than just waiting for a breach and then doing some sort of cleanup on the other end.
Robyn, if I may, what type of information, frequency of contact, et cetera, management interacting with the board to talk about how they're thinking about things, what framework they've put in place, and certainly from a managerial perspective, what's important to them and information being shared with the board.
Yeah, and this is an area where many directors believe that there's room for improvement in terms of information that they're getting from management. So in the handbook, we recommend a couple of ideas in terms of categories of information that the board might ask for. One is around what we call situational awareness. So these are things like, who are our most likely adversaries? Where are our biggest areas of vulnerability? What are our most critical data assets, which I think the term crown jewels is now becoming a pretty commonly known term. And then what have been the results of our most recent penetration tests or external assessments of the company's defenses? Second, to Larry's points earlier, how exactly has management built cyber threat assessment into company policies, into operating plans, into budgets? You know, if we're the board, we want to ask management, tell us how this is playing out and kind of cascading throughout the company, throughout different departments and functions in the company. And then, what's our incident response plan? To Larry's point, we ought to have one, and it ought to be established well in advance of any incident. It's interesting, I was at a panel a couple days ago, and one of the experts there was talking about how the best and most prepared companies that he's seen are ones that actually have had some recent incidents because they've been able to improve and upgrade and assess sort of where some of the holes were. While we don't want to wish that on anyone, someone else on the panel suggested that one way to do that and to get some good conversations going in the boardroom is to run a tabletop exercise, run a simulation, and really see how it plays out, and are people prepared to get the calls from the press or the calls from the FBI, and what do you do when it comes in the middle of the night?
How do you avoid overspending on IT security technology? I'd give the corollary as well. How do I know that I'm spending enough? And how does that impact my tolerance levels?
The research is fairly clear over a number of years that the number one problem with respect to securing critical infrastructure or any company is cost. If we're going to be talking about this, we have to talk about this in a cost benefit fashion. And you have to start with the notion, as you correctly pointed out, Jim, that you need to understand your own risk tolerance. We are now at the stage with these cyber attacks, as I described earlier, where you're going to be breached. We have moved away from the notion of perimeter defense. The bad guys, if they really target you, they're going to get in. That doesn't mean you don't have any defenses, but it does mean you have to have a different sort of defense. You have to be dealing more with response and recovery than prevention. And there are a variety of steps you need to take, one of which is to triage your data. There is certain data that is extremely important, as Robyn alluded to, the crown jewels. And there are sophisticated defense mechanisms that you need to be enacting to deal with those crown jewels, some of which we allude to in the handbook. But corporations often make a mistake of taking these ultra sophisticated strategies and trying to apply it to all their data, which is not cost effective. That's a misspend of data.
In terms of some of the specific tools that are there, we talked about information and reporting to the board. There are a couple of sample board-level reporting dashboards. Again, not meant to be a one-size-fits-all, but at least to start some discussion about what kind of metrics are we seeing as the board, and what might we want to be looking at. Questions that directors can ask management in general about cyber risk oversight, and it touches on many of the things that we've covered today, as well as a specific set of questions that the board could ask management once a breach has happened. And then also there's some questions that directors can use sort of as a self-assessment. So thinking about how cyber literate are we on the board.
I think there's 5 key takeaways as we look at this, and certainly we've talked about it in our comments here today. But let me just walk through these quickly. The first one is all data is not equal. And I think to the point you made earlier, Larry, consider housing your most critical data or IP separately off the grid. So compartmentalization of information based on its degree of importance and relevance. The second item, again, it was a point that you both made, and that is most IT risk is people risk. And when you think about it and reading it, you see this, 90% of data breaches result from people not following established controls. So I ask, do they understand those controls? Do they have the appropriate context as to how their job function deals with those controls and the information that they see? And do they also have a clear sense of responsibility and accountability relative to such information? Third one, request regular cyber incident reports to monitor cyber attacks and trends. It's happening. It will continue to happen. From a board or audit committee perspective, have the CIO share the information from a dashboard perspective or an incident perspective that they're seeing and they're using to establish that risk management framework and to continually to check that framework and make sure it's appropriately responsive to the threats that are manifesting. Next one. Understanding the response plan. We've talked a lot about this, but moving quickly and moving in a very transparent way can be a very critical thing when you think about the impact to your brand, your market value, ongoing basis, how customers and other constituencies look at you as a company. Having a vibrant and game-tested response plan, utmost importance. And then lastly, conducting robust IT assessments periodically. Be sure, as we talked about, to consider the company's entire ecosystem, its entire supply chain, commodity providers, suppliers, et cetera. But there's certainly a lot to do. But I think most importantly, as I said earlier, I've been sharing that handbook with management committee members and directors of my clients because I think it's a wonderful resource guide to up your game in terms of understanding the threat, thinking about how to conduct my oversight responsibilities, helping to establish that framework, managing and monitoring that framework on a go-forward basis.